是来自于以色列的 Assaf Gelber， and 他要讲的题目是 Beating Poker with the help of Ruby。Assaf 目前是一个amateur 的 poker player， 那他今天会跟我们分享的是怎么样子把一些 software 的技术带到 poker games 里面。Is everything okay?
No.
Do you need?
Yes.
Is everything?
Displays. Technical issue number 1 for today. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything.
Can you?
Is it other display? Other menu? Another menu for?
There we go.
Okay. When you press Alt, and tap Scaled. You press Scaled with your mouse, yes. And then on that one.
Yeah. Nice.
Great.
Got it.
There's a time. The lady will tell you the time when the time is up. Okay.
Hi everyone. We got it. Is this working?
No, this
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about how to beat poker with Ruby. So first of all, how many of you have actually played poker before? Cool. And how many of you have lost money playing poker? That's not. You may not need this presentation actually. It looks like you're all pretty good players. So hopefully after this talk, you're all going to be even better poker players than you are today. So my name is Assaf Gelber. I'm from Tel Aviv, Israel. I've been a Rubyist for like 4 years now, and I've been an amateur poker player for about 5 or 6. And I would also like to introduce and embarrass Dana, my girlfriend, who came all the way from Israel with me. She studies geophysics in Tel Aviv, and she is not a poker player, and she's not a Rubyist, but she came anyway, so this is going to be extremely boring for her, but she made it out, so thanks for that. Back to me. I work at the PayPal Consumer Product Center in Tel Aviv. We're building consumer-facing products for PayPal for 170 million customers in 210 different countries. It's pretty crazy. We just launched a new product 10 days ago, which unfortunately wasn't launched in Taiwan, but was launched in the US. So maybe the guys visiting heard of it. It's called PayPal.me. Check it out later if you haven't heard of it. So quick disclaimer, this is a poker talk. I know this is RubyConf, but I really like poker, and I really like talking about poker, so hopefully some of you enjoy listening about poker. And one other thing is that I understand that poker is illegal in Taiwan. So whatever I say stays between us, okay? Awesome. I am only going to be talking about Texas Hold'em, which is the most popular variation of poker at the moment. So everything I say will be true for almost only Texas Hold'em. So I'm just going to start off with a basic introduction to Texas Hold'em for whoever you doesn't play poker. For those who do know it, this is time to tweet about Rudy's talk or check your email or whatever. Right. So a lot of people, when they think about poker, they think about this, right? James Bond movies, James Bond sitting in front of the villain, and he's staring him in the eyes, and he's thinking to himself, his nose just twitched a little bit, he must be bluffing, I'm going to go all in. And then the villain calls, and they turn over their cards, and they all have these amazing hands, and somehow James Bond manages to win. Well, it actually looks more like this. Basically nerds sitting in front of their computers. No offense to that guy. but playing like 12 or 16 tables at a time. And in each situation that they're trying to determine the most statistically profitable decision. And we are going to be talking a lot about this statistically profitable decision and how to make it today. So a hand of Hold'em looks like this. In this case, we have two players, and each player is dealt two hole cards, which are privately held by him. Only he knows them. And on the board, we have 5 shared board cards, which are available to all the players. So in essence, each player has 7 cards available to him, out of which he must make the best 5-card hand with those 7. So let's just do a quick walkthrough of one hand, and then we can understand the situations better later on. We start off with each player being dealt 2 cards. And now we have 1 round of betting. So for example, if that player just bet $20, each player after him has to make a decision whether he's just going to call the $20 that he put in to move on to the next round of betting, whether he's going to raise to make all the other players have to call his bet to move on to the next round, or whether he's just going to fold, which is basically just forfeiting the hand. And if all players fold but one, that one player wins that hand. So assuming we called and moved on to the next round, we see a flop. The flop is the first 3 cards of the 5 shared board cards, and now we have 1 round of betting just like we had before. The players who moved on to the next round see the turn card, which is the 4th shared card. 1 more round of betting, then we have the river, 1 last round of betting, and all the players who made it so far go on to the showdown. In the showdown, every player turns over their cards and we see who wins. So again, we have to make the best 5-card hand. And the hand rankings are, now I'm going to be throwing around a bunch of the names of the hand rankings, so try to remember some of them if you can. The weakest hand is the high card, where I just have an ace in this case, which is a high card, and it would beat anyone who only has a king or a queen and so on. 1 pair, which is just 2 cards of the same rank, and the strength here is determined by the strength of the pair, so 2 queens would beat 2 jacks and 2 tens and so on. 2 pairs, and 3 of a kind, which are pretty much self-explanatory. Then we have a straight, which is all 5 cards in consecutive order. And here the highest card in your straight determines the strength of your straight. So a straight from 5 to 9 would beat a straight from 4 to 8, for example. A flush, which is all 5 cards in the same suit. A full house, which is 3 of a kind plus another pair. 4 of a kind, which is again pretty much self-explanatory. And the strongest hand is the straight flush, where all 5 cards are in consecutive order and of the same suit. So back to our example. In this case, we have the 5-6 of diamonds, so we have a flush, right? We have the 2 cards in our hand plus 3 on the board, so 5 diamonds in total, so we have a flush. And our opponent has 3 jacks with the 2 jacks he has, plus the extra jack on the board. So in this case, we win because the flush is better than 3 of a kind. So you all must be saying to yourself, well, that's easy enough. We just deal cards out, see the flop, turn, river, and whoever has the best cards win. Why would I need math for this? So to prove that, let's look at another situation. Again, we have the 5-6 of diamonds versus the 2 jacks, and on the board we already have the king of diamonds, the 8 of diamonds, the deuce of clubs, and the ace of spades. So in the pot, we have $100, and our opponent just bet $20. Now we have to make a decision now, and we want that decision to be statistically profitable. So let's look at our thought process in how we determine that statistically profitable decision that we were talking about earlier. So there are 52 cards in a deck of cards. 8 of them are already out, so there are 44 remaining cards in the deck. In order to win this hand, we have to get that 5th diamond, right, to make our flush, because getting a 5 or 6 won't help us because he has a better pair. There are 13 diamonds in total. 4 of them are already on the board, so there are 9 remaining diamonds, which means that 9 out of 44 remaining cards would give us the win. So we have approximately 20% chance of winning this hand. We need to pay $20, because our opponent just bet $20, to win 120, the pot plus his bet. And as we said, our chances of winning are 1 to 4. We lose 4 times for every 1 time we win. However, we're being paid 1 to 6, right? So we win 6 times what we put in once in every 5 times that we make that decision. So this is definitely a statistically profitable decision for us, because if we win, we get 6 times what we put in. Okay, so again, that's easy enough, right? Thomas Bayes, the guy in the background, he taught us a whole bunch about statistics. I can do that in my head, right? It's pretty simple math. This is RubyConf. Why do I need Ruby for this? So let's look at one more situation. Again, we have the 5 6 of diamonds versus the 2 jacks, $100 in the pot, and our opponent just bet $20. But this time, we don't know any of the board cards. We are before the flop. So let's take the same approach that we did before and see how that works out. This time we only know 4 of the 52 cards, so there are 48 remaining cards in the deck. In order to win this hand, we could again get a flush, just like we did before, but this time we can also get a straight, right, because we don't know any of the cards yet. We could potentially get 2 more 5s on the board, which would give us 3 of a kind, and that would also give us the win. But then if he gets a jack, then that would give him the win because he has a better 3 of a kind. So in total, we have 34,246,080 different possibilities of flops, turn, and rivers that could come out here. That's 34,246,080 different possibilities, where some of them would give us the win, some of them would just not. That's way, way, way too many possibilities for me to figure out in my head, at least. Maybe you're much better at math than I am, but that's too much for me. So what do? Well, we have poker odds calculators. This is basically just a piece of software that lets us match up a bunch of different hands against each other and see each hand's chances of winning. So in our case, the 5 6 of diamonds has around 22.5%, and the 2 jacks have around 77% of winning. And there's a very slight chance of them tying. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's very useful to us, but how do they work? And the answer to that is super cool math, obviously. And this is where Ruby kicks in. We are going to be looking at the Monte Carlo method, which is a statistical analysis method which these calculators use, which basically means let's take a huge number of random possible outcomes from the situation that we're in and try to look back at those results and try to determine the statistical situation that we were in before. Or in other words, do random stuff and draw conclusions. So this sounds pretty silly, but it's used in quantum physics and fluid dynamics and computer graphics and AI for different games. It's a very reputable strategy for these kinds of situations where just too many different possibilities for us to figure out in advance. And to prove that, we are going to be looking at the Hello World example of the Monte Carlo method, which is making an approximation of pi. And we're going to use this graph right here, where we have a square, which is 1 by 1, and enclosed inside it, we have a quarter of a circle with a radius of 1. So we know that the area of the square is 1 squared, and the area of the quarter circle inside it is 1 squared times pi divided by 4. So the ratio between those two areas is 1 squared over 1 squared times pi divided by 4, which is just pi divided by 4. Now, if we were to take a huge number of random points inside that square and see how many of them fall into that quarter circle, the ratio of points inside the quarter circle, statistically speaking, should be the same as the ratio of the areas. So if we take that ratio and multiply that by 4, we should get pretty close to pi. So let's see that in Ruby. First, we're going to just install a gem called Monte Carlo, which is just a utility gem that lets us run simulations pretty easy and just analyze the results with a few handy methods. And this is code. What we're doing here is just defining an origin point, which is the bottom left corner. And we create an experiment, and we're running this experiment 1 million times. And each time what we do is generate a random point inside that square. And we're going to check the distance from that point to the origin. So this should return true if that point is inside that quarter circle, right? The distance is under or equal to 1, and otherwise it should return false. Now, if we look at the probability of getting true and multiply that by 4, we should get pretty close to pi. And as we see, we do. So that's pretty cool. And take that, Archimedes. We just did in around 8 lines of Ruby what took him a huge bunch of measurements and 96-sided polygons and whatever, and we got actually closer to pi than he managed to get, so that's 1 point for Ruby. Okay, so let's build a calculator. But first, let's talk about hand ranking, right? So how do I know in code that one hand is better than another? So I've seen 3 different ways to do this. The first one is the boring decremental way, which is pretty boring and slow, where you just have a set of rules for each of the different hands, right? So if I get 5 cards, I need to check, for example, that I have 5 cards of the same suit, which would give me a flush, and if not, if they're all consecutive, then I have a straight, and so on and so on. Boring and slow. There's the cool regex way, which I saw implemented by Rob Olson in a gem he used for poker, where he would encode each hand as a string, with each card being represented as 3 characters, where the first one is the distance from the current card to the previous card. The second character is the actual rank of the card, and the third is the suit. So H for hearts, and D for diamonds, and so on. And this was pretty cool because he had a bunch of different regex patterns that would match each of the different hands. So for example, 4 of a kind, he looks for the rank of the first card and then checks that he has it again another 4 times. So that was really, really awesome in my opinion. Still pretty slow, but better. And the third way is the fast bitmask table way, which is implemented in a poker library called PokerStove, which is used in almost every piece of software written for poker. And it's way too much for one slide, but what he basically did was just take all the different possible combinations of hands in advance and figure out their rank and just save it in a text file which he would parse out. And then in runtime, he just encodes the hands that he get in the same way he encoded the hands before, and just a simple table lookup would give him the actual rank of the hand. So this is super, super fast. It does take some space and some computation in advance, but it's super, super fast in runtime. So back to our calculator. Done. Around 10 lines of Ruby, and this is completely working. We just create a new deck, and we draw the 2 hands that we need. So in our case, the 5, 6 diamonds versus the 2 jacks. And we run our experiment again 1 million times, and each time we shuffle the deck and look at 5 cards to act as our board cards, and we match up the 2 hands. So this operator will return 1 if the first hand won, -1 if the second hand is better, and 0 if they tie. So we look at the probability distribution of the results that we got, and we see that we're actually pretty close to what we saw in the calculator before. So around 22% for the 5, 6 of diamonds, around 78% for the 2 jacks, and a very small chance of winning, of tying, excuse me. So that's pretty cool. We can totally use this when we're playing poker to figure out different situations that we're in. However, it's actually not that simple. And it's not that simple for 2 main reasons. The first one is that in all the examples that I showed, we know what our opponent has. And that's actually not the case when you're playing poker, because otherwise it would be a pretty boring game. And the second issue is that we never know what our opponent is going to do next, right? So if we're calling $20 right now, but on the next round of betting he bets $200, if we were to know that in advance, maybe our perception of that situation would be completely different, and calling there wouldn't be very profitable for us. So let's see how we work around these 2 problems in poker. So firstly, a hand of poker actually looks like this, right? We know we have the 5, 6 diamonds, but we don't know what our opponent has. So essentially, poker is what we call a game of ranges. In each situation that we're in, we try to assign a range of possible hands to our opponent. Now, the better poker players we are, the more we can narrow down that range, and even sometimes in specific situations to one specific hand, if we're very, very good and we know our opponent very well. So a hand of poker looks more like this to us. If we know our opponent really well, and we know that he would only bet $20 into a pot of $100 with a very strong starting hand, we can assume that he only has ace queen, ace king, 2 kings, 2 aces, and maybe some hands in between, like 2 jacks or 2 queens. So our range for our opponent is a very, very strong starting hand range, and then we can play our hand accordingly because we know how our hand plays against each of the hands in his range. and hopefully we're correct. So how do we get a good understanding of our opponents? We use hand history. Now, this is only true for online poker, because in online poker we can just get a complete dump of all the hands that we've played against all our opponents ever. And if we parse that out, we can look back at that history in specific situations and try to figure out different things about the way our opponent thinks and plays and adjust our game according to that. So this can give us 3 super critical insights. The first one is what he's likely to have. So if we played a specific situation against a specific opponent hundreds of times, and he's played the same each time, and each time he had that same specific hand, we can assume that if he's doing the same now, he's very likely to have that hand again. The second thing is what he's likely to do. So again, if we've been in a specific situation hundreds of times before, and he's always done one specific decision, we can assume he's going to do that again. And the third thing is how he's likely to react to the things we do. So again, if we did something very specific in a very specific situation hundreds of times before, and he's always reacted the same way, we can assume that he's going to react that way again now. And these are super, super critical to our understanding of the game. They do take a huge number of sample size, but when we're playing online poker, we can usually get thousands of hands a day. And these insights are very, very important to our perception of the hand in real time when we're actually playing, and they only take a little bit of parsing in Ruby. So the last thing I want to show you is 3 very basic statistics that we can look at and parse out from our hand history when we're actually playing and really try to figure out our opponent in real time. So we're just going to fire up our hand history, and we're going to look for the player JBond007, against which we are playing now. And the first stat that we're going to look at is the VPIP. Now, VPIP stands for voluntarily put money in pot. So what this stat means is how many hands our opponent has decided to play out of all the hands that he's seen so far. So if this number is very, very low, we call our opponent tight. Which means he's only playing a very small number of hands, and we can assume that he's only electing to play the strongest of hands that he's getting. So if this player decided to play a hand, we can assume he has a pretty strong hand. And the opposite is true here. If this number is very big, our opponent is called looser. He's going to be playing a wider range of hands, and if he's playing a hand right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that his hand is very strong, and we can adjust our play according to that. The second stat is the aggression frequency, which basically means how many of the decisions that he's making are aggressive decisions. So how many bets and raises he's making to the total number of calls and folds that he's making. So the more aggressive our opponent is, we can be aware that if we're playing a hand against him, we are going to have to call more money later on in the hand because he's going to be betting. And again, the opposite's true. If our opponent is very passive, we can see the next rounds of betting pretty cheaply because he is not very likely to bet. And the last pretty cool thing that we can see is just look at all the hands that he's reached showdown with. So if he's reaching showdown with hands that aren't very strong, for example, like high cards and one pairs, that's okay if we have a hand that's not very strong, but he's still playing back at us. However, if he's only reaching showdown with hands that are very strong, like straights and flushes and full houses and so on, and he's playing back at us until the showdown, we can assume that he has a strong hand again, because we don't think he would do that unless he has a strong hand. So we can adjust our game according to what we know and our perception of the different opponents. However, again, it's actually not that simple. Everything that I said here will be true against players that are playing pretty basic poker. And the majority of players are playing pretty basic poker. But players that are a bit more advanced know that you're using these stats against them, and they know how to adjust their ranges according to what you think their range is. So it gets super, super complicated. And poker is just a game of like super intricate strategy and levels of thinking, and you really have to know how good your opponent is to be able to understand how good he thinks you are, and so on. So it gets pretty mind-boggling all the way to the different levels of thinking. And people actually devote their lives. I mean, people play poker professionally, and they get pretty good. I do assure you, however, that if you actually go back and analyze your hands retrospectively and in real time, you will be a better poker player. But unfortunately, I can't guarantee that you're going to win. So I do urge you to try, but don't blame me for all the money that you lose, especially not in Taiwan because it's illegal, so don't do it. Yeah, but go ahead and try. Thank you very much. We have time for questions? Yes, questions?
有人有任何问题吗
Okay.
Okay, great.
Yes, one.
So I was wondering how much hand history you would need to get good results to predict.
So you can get a pretty good understanding after a few hundred hands against a specific opponent. So I would say at least like 400 or 500, but I mean the more you have, the better, obviously.
Did you run any tests? Do you have any tests online or something like that?
Not at all.
I'll be interested to check it out.
No, I don't write tests for this. I just hope it works out and try to win. All right.
Any more questions? 还有没有其他人有任何的问题？没有吗？最后一次机会哦。Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hold on a second.
Oh.